Hi there. My name is David Klassen, and I'm doing a report on basically U.S. And Canadian jobs numbers posted by Statistics Canada and the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the United States. Um, so a lot of talk about all this stuff with AI and job loss and all that, and I'm here to debunk the numbers and show you what we know because we don't know there's any conspiracy theories. People just like to say that a lot. So why don't we dig in the numbers right away? Something we see here in the data is that when we compare Canada and the United States, um, there's something like 10% difference in the jobs that are posted compared to America. Now, when we go into the numbers for America, we have this thing called non-farm and private, whereas in Canada we just have totals, right? And so one of the reasons that might be um, is from what we discovered that about um, they like to really distinguish between government and private. So non-farm is basically um, government on top of private, but that government portion might include public schools. It doesn't include things like independent business owners, farms, U.S. military, CIA, all that stuff. So it's kind of like a civilian class of government on top of the private sector to get the numbers. And so we're seeing it's about, 11 to 12%. Canadian jobs represent 11, or yeah, 11, 12% as compared to what is posted in America for the jobs. And if we look at the sectors we specifically want to talk about in this report, we wanted to get into professional scientific um, in our report as opposed to just professional and business. So we're able to find these numbers using um, something called the Labor Force Survey in Canada, and in America, it's called the Common Employment Statistics. And specifically, we see here um, that we've got about, again, 10%. This is healthcare in Canada, and this is healthcare in America. And it's almost 10% of the jobs in America are in Canada. So they got basically 90% more jobs. And if we look at it for healthcare, or sorry, educational services, um, oh, we don't see that. It's less. Okay, we're going to describe why that is in this report, hopefully. The instant answer is um, this is private educational listing. They don't have a listing for like public education because that's considered government. So the numbers are a bit obscure. So let's forget about that. If we see in tech, the number is again is about roughly 10% of the jobs, maybe a little bit more in science and technology. And wow, what do you know? That pretty much proves out when we look at the USA and Canada, it's almost like Canada has 10% of the population of the States. So makes a statistician's job kind of easy to try to prove that Canada is keeping up with the States if we look at the data. And then when we come to available jobs, in Canada, they have the job wage survey. And in America, they have something called the JOLTS, which is openings, layoffs, and turnovers and hires. And they call it the JOLTS. So what we see in terms of jobs available, like in Canada, there's about 2%, 3 to 6%, it says in my stat here, of the jobs that are in America. And this, as we described, is a comparison between non-farm and Canada, the totals. We're going to leave out private for the moment. Um, but the Canadian statistics talk about vacancies and payroll employees. Whereas in America, they talk about hires and openings versus layoff, quits, and separations, having a total separations number. So here we're just looking at hires and openings. And I think if you remove the hires here, you know, it's a sizable portion, but there's actually a lot of openings listed here. and we're still well below what's given there. Um, let's just include hires again. You see the percentage changing, right? Actually, anyway. Um, so um, and then let's look at the numbers for vacancies. We can see that the vacancies in America have this spike here. And for professional services in Canada, it does have a spike, but it's not as pronounced, and it, gradually goes down, but a little bit steeper than healthcare. Healthcare kind of stays there, but it also is going down. And education, we can barely see it because the amount of employees are, sorry, it's the amount of job openings are, just not as many. If we look at payroll numbers, it'll be different. We'll do that in a second. So this is how we did the comparison. Um, some of the stats don't line up, as we're going to show you, but it's interesting to see there are similarities. So if we look at Canada, for instance, in general, one thing I noticed looking at Canada data is that population is constant. And, um, but there was a little blip on this graph. It's like hard to find a blip, but if you find one, this was COVID. So they were able to get this number. You can see like we went from like 19 down to 16,000 jobs in the employment sector. Um, and, we know that why that is. If we look at the COVID stats, they had produced this in June 2020, described the comeback of different sectors. And, it seems to be that sectors that don't have a lot of contact with humans came back much lower. And if we look at job growth, though, we've got a lot of industries. We picked these ones because they seem to be interesting. For instance, if we take out professional services, it was interesting to find that education here spikes or is more constant in the winter, whereas in construction, they lose jobs. And they peak usually in summer months um, in construction, which is kind of opposite of what we see in education. So that was a point of interest. And then you can see professional services is actually growing, and it seems to be growing at quite a good clip, a bit higher than education or um, construction, even though they are all pretty well big growth industries. And then here we have health with the highest increase, and you can barely see these blips. One of the reasons you don't see blips on this data is that it's not available. This is the vacancy data, um, and we just didn't have numbers for 2020, at least 6 months in 2020 for Canada at all. When we look at vacancies by industry, this is the absence of jobs. I think that's what I just showed you, right? Oh, no, sorry, the growth was the payroll employees, but we have another listing for vacancies in Canada. So job vacancies shows that we got like quite a bit of job growth after 2020, even if there was a plummet. There's job growth here. And healthcare and high tech, though they've been experiencing a reduction since April 2020, at least in construction. And education, it doesn't seem to have the same issues. And it might be because it's a little bit more constant on the government side of the equation. And then we wanted to show you vacancy rate. Now, this is a percentage point offered by StatsCan. Um, and in this, they all seem a little bit more relative because it's not about just the job numbers, it's about the declines. You can see the construction at a worse incline than even professional services. I thought it'd be scientific, and but this is NAICS code 54 if you can see it there, and construction has a code as well at the end, and healthcare 62 and 61 for education. But you can see education doesn't really seem to drop. It's consistent. Healthcare does. Construction even more so. But professional services, it happens quicker and faster, from my opinion. And we're wondering like why that might be. So let's go to high growth vacancies. Let's compare professional and scientific services against other sectors like accommodations. Well, maybe not because accommodations would have been horribly impacted by COVID. So we could take them off the map, right? But what about these other ones? Well, it falls pretty much in line with some of the other ones. Again, construction and the new ones here are retail and manufacturing. They they follow at a pretty good shop that are almost right in line with professional services. So why might that be? And the question we had is why at April 2022? It's an interesting number there, right? So I've been listening to all the news over my lifetime, and in the news they always talk about recessions and new housing starts. So here we can see that recessions we've had in the last 40 years, 60 years. We don't see one in the cards right now. But if we look at the housing starts for April 2022, it's a peak. Sorry, I can't get it there. Oh, I had it for a second. In my report, it was much easier to grab this. Okay, anyway, just trust me, April 2022, we've got a peak. And why is that? Are we headed for another recession? Well, we can see here that that recession here resulted as kind of a sharp incline. Oops, but we don't really seem to be having a sharp incline here, do we? Um, sorry, in this place, we don't see a sharp incline. There was a sharp incline here, recession in America. But you also have subtle declines here, like from 1984 to 1990, there was a slow decline and then a recession. So we could be in one of those pivotal points right now. Let's continue looking at the data to find out more. Um, right, so that's Canada. What about America? So, uh, is the graph that different? Not really. Here again, we're showing you some stats because they have non-farm and farm payrolls. But across professional services, we're seeing this spike again. And then this here in job loss was the big loss in COVID. So we're not having a loss like COVID, apparently. But um, in this area here, at least in America, we have a lot of openings that are being reduced. Hires and openings are being reduced in this graph here, as opposed to total separations, which is in focus industry there. So, if we look at the totals, we get a massive, we get a spike down at COVID and then a massive spike up in all the sectors. So non-farm and private, pretty much the same. And then America has a lot more industries highlighted. They have a larger economy. But, you know, trade and hospitality and accommodation were leaders prior to 2020. And now, it looks like professional and scientific and education and health services are, they're pretty much the stalwarts. Um, I did some calculations on the loss here, and it seemed like Canada during COVID lost 15% of the US jobs, which is really high because we're 10% of their weight, right? So we don't quite know why that is. And but in the areas we want to focus in here, this spike is amazing. Um, Yeah, large demand spikes and then a spiral down for those two industries. Now, as we said before, education can't be compared with these charts. Um, Construction's not the same either. But that's because a lot of there's, government education, right? And the question we had in this chart is why does private education and healthcare services spike up in the openings and hires? And why does these guys? So we actually found a mystery here. We believe this should be chopped off. This is inaccuracy in for these 2 points specifically. Tableau made an error in calculation, doubling the amount. Um, but yeah, again, it does look like private education is at least it's pretty static too. So not as volatile as these other industries, these growth industries. Um, but if we look at openings only, Doesn't seem to matter much, right? We had hires, openings, hires. The numbers seem pretty much the same. So leads us to again to ask, I mean, maybe Tableau made this mistake on us. Maybe it didn't. I don't know. I really tried to look at the numbers and I couldn't get these spikes to disappear. The numbers were like actually a bit lower for May. But here would be the spike in April 2022. And why? Well, if you've listened to enough news, as I have, they talk about housing starts. This is what economists do, housing starts, and they also talk about interest rates. And here we see in March and February 2022, and especially after April. So as we go into May, a big zero point 0.5 rate hike for the US Fed. And that sends people reeling. People look at the interest rates. They have historically statisticians for years. So this seems to indicate something very different. You know, with COVID, governments reduce the spending or reduce interest and help people along by providing access, easy access to money. But you know, after a lot of private business owners got up and complained, or whatever it was with the whole trucker strike, who knows, oil boomed after that, and also interest rates. And now we're back in this, you know, high interest rate economy. Well, what does that mean? It effectually means something like recession. If we go back to this data, like there could be some kind of recession. What we've seen, this is just you and I talking now, and it's nothing to do with the numbers or visualizations, but I've seen the prices of chocolate double lately. So non-oil economy, a lot of the prices, you know, going out to eat, they've just become much more expensive. So, you know, here's the US data. Professional services, so interesting in the US data, it's much larger, you know. We're gonna do a breakdown in a second to try to describe that, but you know, uh, health care as well is like it's well, it's they're large industries. Hopefully, I can detail why in a second, why that's so important. Something about being tied to humans and emergency services really make that important. Um, I know that if we go back to uh, my link here for these stats, you can see public administration and finance insurance are coming back quicker after COVID than even professional scientific services. Yet we would say all, you know, this sector probably helped all these people be able to work remotely. So why would they be less? And that's what happens when you serve other groups. You don't, it's not always about you, right? So if we go to the general stats, we have some more general stats. They do non-farm. They do not. This is U.S. stats again. We're going to break down the U.S. stats because they go for 86 years back to 1939, as you can see. We've got um, sort of the breakdown where you got government plus private equals non-farm. And then you got these other stats like good producing, private service providing. Um, Technically, I think that probably becomes service providing. Anyway, there's some more details we can look in and generalizations in the US numbers. We can also see over time they've added more sectors. So you can see like in 1955, they added state and local government to the counts as opposed to just general government. And you know those things include healthcare, something to think about if you look into that data. And when we do look into the data, we can see, wait a minute, we got healthcare here and ambulatory healthcare services. Like in the current employment statistics in the States, they cover just tons of different potential services. So if you want to break things down, you're going to have better luck with American data, but you also got more numbers. So sometimes it's a bit easier to look at things simply, and maybe that's why we do that. We do just cover simple things in Canada. One thing we see in their numbers, which is the crux of everything I got out of this, is that the professional scientific services have the number of job growth here has basically went flat. And I guess the same is true for healthcare and these other industries. Well, but it's not going down as much. So actually, there's some promise there, isn't there? Whereas in other sectors, we see that's sort of following that openings and hires down trend. And then we ask this see in the JOLTS, we only get the professional and business services. We don't get a breakdown to scientific. Um, And like, what is this administrative and support services? Is this some sort of AI thing I don't know about? So we've looked at the data and wondered, like, maybe America needs to reclassify the tech sector, perhaps. Um, and if we look at straight jobs, um, we can see this flat line again. We can also see America left manufacturing, the growth in manufacturing probably in 79 and in 2000 almost completely dropped out of the picture. So America's moved into a period of time where they're not doing manufacturing, they offshored it. Will they bring it back? There's a lot of current events we're talking about. One thing's for sure is that how we treat humans is super important. Healthcare is not reducing, according to these stats. It's going up and up. And it seems to be beating out professional scientific services and construction and education as well. Um, right. Let's go back here for a second. Trying to figure out why the data doesn't match up here. Sorry, we'll cover that at a different time. Um, oh, this is the way I did it. So, and this is a way of charting it. It's just one graph looked much easier than the other. Okay, so there we have all our numbers. Um, I'd like to make a brief conclusion here, and I'm gonna take it out of my project. Um, hopefully as a way to get you, encourage you to read the report. It is a long one, but let's read the last paragraph. We actually see that in the data. As soon as we see interest rates rise, job hires, openings, and vacancies start to plummet. A confirmation is in the industry data that new housing starts to dwindle and a boom in construction industry starts to wane. You can see this written into the recession history of America, and the construction industry is a complete indicator of how investors will leave the market when it comes hard to fund projects. Right. So that means this curve here is the same as the one we saw in our data for new housing starts. It follows these downs in the same years. So we get it down in 90 here of construction. And so a lot of these things are following the economic cycles. Um, and it's a complete indicator of how investors will leave markets when it becomes harder or more risky to fund projects. And so I wanted to conclude here, AI isn't taking people out of work. We can see it's actually consistent. But I think we're in the normal course of inflation, the inflation process, and that makes corporate budgets um, harder to fund R&D. R&D becomes more expensive, so the budget gets cut, and they can't hire as many workers. However, that's just what we see on the surface of the economy, things that we can measure. We can't measure entrepreneurs, self-employed workers, farm workers, and the small sectors that no one talks about because the governments just don't have data on these shrinking violets. I'm an independent business owner and I was out of work for 9 months. That's why I'm doing this report. Um, but specialists like me aren't really in the numbers. So, but we can learn about the greater numbers that are going on when new grads go into the companies. But these are the basics. And as I say in this funny ending, never get off the hamster wheel of new technology because that decision to jump will kill you. So just relax, keep on going with your life. Um, sometimes they're going to need to slow down the economy periodically to help people understand that change is constant in the economy. And like any business, you need an exit strategy potentially. Um, so that's all I have to say today. I hope this has been interesting for you to look at. I have a lot of data, and it wasn't easy. They have a 13th month in the U.S. data has to remove, and I wanted to filter for Canada the nation, not Canada the provinces. And I guess I'll probably share with you the large data sets and or maybe the smaller data sets as well. But that's what we see in the numbers. Um, maybe one other thing I'll share with you because the executive summary for me is interesting to create. I simply go over the fact that we do have some good AI tools, but it seems like business as usual and sort of mimic what I've written in the rest of the report. I encourage you to look into it if you don't know what non-farm payrolls are, as I describe that and some of the things that we notice in analyzing the data. So thank you for listening today and hope you have a great afternoon.